Welcome back, guys. My name is Martin Jones and this is P2 Corporate Reporting. This is session 4 as it goes, and this is the second half of session 4. And over my shoulder is the fully complete cash flow from the question Ducky. And I've set it up in such a way to answer Punnet's question. There was actually only one question. That's how do I learn where I slap stuff on the cash flow statement? Two different ways of interpreting that question, so I'll answer it both ways. The first thing is how do I learn to do the process of the cash flow statement? Well, there's no magic. It's just repetition, and the more that you repeat, the more that you learn where stuff goes. Stuff goes where I put it, and the way to learn where to put stuff is to put stuff there yourself and therefore repeat the questions. But there's a slightly different question, which is, what if I'm dealing with something unusual that I've never seen before? Where should I put that on the cash flow statement? And indeed, talk to me more broadly about the subject of presentation of cash flow statements. Now, as it happens, this works really well because we're moving on to question 4 very shortly. The examination's made up of 4 questions. There's question 1, which is the numbers. Question 2, which is the focus question. Question 3, which is the mixed question. And question 4, which is the current issue question. And there is a current issue about the presentation of a cash flow statement. In fact, the IFRS on cash flow statements has very wobbly definitions of what's an operating cash flow, what's an investing cash flow, and what's a financing cash flow. And it really does mean that if you slap anything anywhere, you'll be marked right. I mean, I'll give you a good idea, do put the dividends where I put the dividends. But, dividends wanders about literally all over the place. Very common for dividends to be investing, and sometimes they even appear in operating, which seems bonkers to me. But dividends in real companies wanders about all over the place. What else tends to wander about all over the place? Interest paid sometimes appears in investing, sometimes appears in operating. Tax, that wanders about. These balances wander about. Now, don't wander them about. For your purposes, you'll find it much more comfortable experience if you lock everything down and whack everything down in the way that I've presented it here. The way that I've presented it here is the presentation of the vast majority of companies across the world. But more importantly, it is the presentation of the examiner, which of course is what you want. So don't wander balances about. But the point is you could. So Punnett, if you come across a cash flow statement, he actually used the word judge. How do you judge what to put in investing and financing? If you come across a balance that you've never seen before and you're wondering, should it go in investing or should it go in financing, or indeed should it go into operating, then do exactly what you've suggested there, which is just judge based on gut feeling, using the idea that operating flows are what you do, investing flows are non-current assets, and financing flows are what they sound like, which is to do with debt and equity. So that's it. That's all there is to it, Operating flows are just operating flows, investing flows are investing in non-current assets, and financing flows are the finance related to your debt and equity. And if you find that you do come across a balance that you're not too sure where it goes, almost certainly it won't matter where it goes. So you could put it, if you're thinking, shall I put it in investing, shall I put it in financing, almost certainly you'll be marked right if you put it in either, because almost certainly it's another example of a balance where it doesn't have a particular place. But going forward, it is proposed eventually that the cash flow statement will be locked down and things will have places. There will be places for things. It is proposed going forward in a development project. And it is these words that take us to question 4. Before we go to question 4, I'll just check, is everyone cool? Especially Punnett, are you cool with that answer? Everyone all right? It's gone very quiet. Cool. Great. Me too. I've got the aircon on full blast. Right, in which case we'll start the second half of this presentation. That involves me going right back to the introduction. So back up to the top and then into the introduction. And in the introduction on page 6 it appears we've got format of the paper. Can you see that? And I'll just bring it up and just change the scale very slightly so it's slightly easier for me to present. There we go. Maybe I'll bring it down just a little bit so I can have format it. There we go. The exam is made up of 2 sections. Section 1 is 50 marks. It's a compulsory case study and it's labelled as question 1. So section A is the 50-mark case study. The 50-mark case study has 35 marks of numbers and 15 marks of narrative. The 15 marks of narrative are usually the easiest part of the whole examination, in terms of the narrative anyway. And keeping it simple, they're basically ethics. So you get written a little story and you're asked to discuss the ethics of the issue. And the ethics of the issue is 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, maybe every time basically, you're talking about creative accounting, someone manipulating financial statements for their own benefit rather than presenting a true and fair view. So that's the narrative component. But question 1, numbers, that's P&L or balance sheet or cash flow statement. Yes, indeed, there are actually 3 forms of question 1. We've got the 2 forms of consolidation, which are very, very similar to each other. Consolidated P&L, consolidated balance sheet. What do you do for that? You add across, add across, add across. But the consolidated cash flow statement, as you can see, doesn't involve adding across at all. It involves you whacking out a pro forma and doing what we've just done there, doing workings and so on. So you don't actually consolidate a consolidated cash flow, which is interesting, isn't it? You don't. A consolidated cash flow statement is not produced by process of consolidation. It's produced by the process that we just did. So everyone's always ready for P&L and balance sheet, but sometimes students don't get themselves ready for a cash flow statement. And when a cash flow statement comes up and they can't do it, they might as well say, right, okay, I'm going to have to wait till the next exam. So make sure that you can do a cash flow statement. Now, as it happens, cash flow statement's getting a little bit hot now, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if there was a cash flow statement. So they're all roughly equal in, tippability, but maybe 40% chance. Oh, that's never been examined, Ridwan, so I'll just answer that like that. That's never been examined, Ridwan, your question. It's never been examined, so you can send me an email if you want to, but it's never been examined in a cash flow statement. The possibilities for question 1A are P&L, balance sheet and cash flow statement. And it's basically that order in reverse. So the most likely is a cash flow statement, then a balance sheet, and then a P&L. And roughly speaking, I'm going to suggest to you the probabilities are something of the order of CFS, balance sheet, P&L, something like 40%, 35%, 25%. But you can see that they're not too far off a third each. So make sure you get ready for all 3. Carrying on then. Sitting between question 1 and question 4 are the 2 techie questions. The focus question tends to focus on one area of financial reporting, but does bring others in. So it might be focusing on fair value, but you're looking at the fair value of property and the fair value of football players, and then the fair value of share-based payment, and then the fair value of a lease. So it's got other stuff coming in, but it's got a theme, as the examiner calls it. And question 3 really is just a complete mix of everything. Now, to be honest with you, the difference between question 2 and question 3 is really, really small. They're basically techie questions where you set a load of problems and you're asked to solve those problems by using the technique of discussion, by using the pen. And they're pretty hard, actually. Question 2 and question 3 are pretty hard. Now, question 4 is definitely hard, but it's easier than the other two. And you definitely want to be doing question 4, and that's where we're going now. We're going to the subject of current issues. Can I just big that up? That's what I want to do there. And then we'll do that. That's what I want to do. Now, current issues is the theoretical question where you have a current issue to discuss. Let's just start. Let's just start, guys. Sorry, my apologies. Humayun has asked the question, how do markers mark? Are they strict? There is a marking guide, but definitely not strict, no. We are encouraged to award marks to students who are clearly capable. So you can actually score quite good marks if you communicate very clearly, but you don't quite get the right answer. Or equally, if you don't get quite the right clarity, but you've got a technically correct answer. We're really encouraged. Obviously, the best answer is the answer that's right and clear. But if you're right and unclear, and you're clear and wrong, you can still score lots of marks. So no, marking is not particularly strict. Probably not the easiest thing to talk about marking without an exam question in front of me. And that's something that we'll be looking at when we're on the revision course. So I'll be giving you very, 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 very detailed knowledge about how markers mark in the context of the 4 exams we're going to do together on the revision course. The basis of the revision course is basically we do half an exam every evening session, every session. So you'll be doing an awful lot of exam questions, and when we do those exam questions, then I'll talk to you in more detail about exactly how the examiners mark. But especially in question 4, because the question is asking you to talk about something, then there becomes this, sort of long shopping list of possible ideas that you could include, but then there's like this caveat at the end, and any other idea that seems relevant will be given the appropriate marks. So the consequence is that, particularly in question 4, that's when the marking guide is at its loosest. Doing a current issue question is all about just having a go at answering the question. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you when I have a look at a question in a second. So I'm going to start teaching you about current issues. Now, current issues are issues that are current in the examiner's mind. And the examiner is called Graham Holt, and he writes articles for the ACCA in a section called CPD. And basically what happens is he writes an article and then he examines it, then he writes an article and he examines it. So the articles that I'm going to get you into are on the ACCA website, and there's no harm in going there now, at least to get the idea. So we'll go to the ACCA website. I'll just put it into the search engine. Oops. There it is. And as you know, the ACCA website's a little bit clunky, isn't it? And the articles that you want are what's called CPD articles, so CPD articles. And it's quite hard actually to find these CPD articles unless you use the search. So let's use the search. So CPD articles from AB magazine. AB stands for Accounting and Business. So CPD stands for Continuing Professional Development, and your examiner writes these articles. So off we go. It's the top line of the search there that you want, and they're blocked out into years. So let's take 2016 for example, let's go there. Now, can you see Graham's name there? Improving Disclosures Practices, Graham Holt. Now the scary thing is that each of these articles is around about 3,000 words each, and he writes one a month and has been doing for the last 10 years, and they're all examinable. Now that's a bit of a shock to the system, isn't it? But let me give you a little bit more context here so you get a feel for this. CPD stands for Continuing Professional Development, and the target audience of these articles are actually qualified accountants like me and my wife. And if you decide to specialise in financial reporting, like me and my wife, then you read these articles to keep up to date. So the level is above P2, it's quite a bit above P2. So what you really need from these articles, I will tell you on the revision course. That is in fact part of the revision course. Now, the examiner writes an article a month, 12 a year. And unfortunately, it's not he writes an article, then he examines it in question 4. He writes an article, then examines it in question 4. First of all, there's 3 articles every quarter and only 1 question 4 every quarter. And also some articles are not so relevant and some articles are more relevant, and sometimes in one question he might examine 3 things, and sometimes he might write about something, and then 18 months later he examines it. So there's quite a lot of politics going on here. So it's entirely up to you, but what I suggest at this stage is you don't read Graham's articles. I will teach you these articles on the revision course, again going back to the revision course. So on the revision course I will teach you these articles, but these articles do require a degree of understanding of the politics of corporate reporting. And that's why I'm going to get you to read articles. But I'm not going to recommend just yet that you aim for Graham's articles. What I'm going to recommend you aim for is the Ivory Tower articles. Now let me talk about those. So in order to get into current issues, I want you to do 2 things. There are 2 responsibilities. The 2 responsibilities relate to the 2 components of question 4. The 2 components of question 4 are the knowledge, or the stories themselves, the knowledge and the application. Now, the knowledge, to get the stories, you do need to read. And what I want you to do is to read the Ivory Tower articles. Now, the Ivory Tower articles cover some of Graham's articles. They basically are his articles rewritten. But if I take you to chapter 5, there we go. It's a bit slow. Let's see if I can get that going a bit quicker. There you go. If I take you to chapter 5 and to page 54, you will see that my articles certainly aren't 3,000 words. And what they do is they summarise the basics that you need to know in order to get into the culture of question 4. So the first article is a nice little introduction on the International Accounting Standards Board, and the next article, just to, how can we change scale? Change scale a little bit if I can. So the first article is on the International Accounting Standards Board, and the next article is on convergence, and you can see they're very short articles. Next one's on David Tweedy, and then the next one's on cohesiveness. And this is the way it goes, because these question 4s are actually very broad, and what they're really saying to you is, here's a open canvas, say what you like, then it doesn't matter what the question is, the answer is cohesiveness. It doesn't matter what the question is, the answer is David Tweedy. It doesn't matter what the question is, the answer is ISB. It doesn't matter what the question is, the answer is revenue. So if the question's on revenue, the answer is obviously revenue. But if the question is actually on leases, you can still talk about revenue. Because what the examiner does is he gives you 15 marks in which he has a general subject that he wants you to talk about, but he's actually inviting you to talk about anything that you want to, and you can bring in anything you want to discuss the thing he's talking about. And as long as you're talking about the thing he's talking about, whatever it is, whether it's market behaviour or shareholders' attitudes or presentation or the size of corporate reporting or the timing of corporate reporting, or maybe it's on revenue, or maybe it's on leases, or maybe it's on provisions, or maybe it's on regulatory environment. It doesn't really matter what the question's on. Whatever the question is on, you can bring whatever you want to, as long as you're still talking about the broad subject. So there's another skill. And, it is true, some people are just better at this than others. It's the application. In other words, the storytelling. And in order to answer that, you need to do the question value. And what's going to happen is I'm going to do question value with you. If you skip down, you will find question value on page 76. So still in chapter 5, page 76. And I'll do a part of it. Obviously I've only got a limited amount of time, so I'll just do a little bit of it with you. But then I will ask you to have a go at value yourself. I'll probably do value part C, because I've only got a few minutes left and I do want to show you a little bit. So I'll do value part C and show you how these questions are answered and how they're not technical, but you do need to have some kind of a knowledge. And you just get this from reading the Ivory Tower articles, but you also do need good storytelling, and you get that from practicing the question value. So what I'd like you to do with value is I'd like you to have a go at value. I'll do part C, then you do A, B and C. See if you can come up with your own C, then you scan it, you whack it over to me, and I'll give you a mark, okay? So have a go at question value and see if you can score 13 out of 25 on your first attempt. See if you can actually do it. Now I want you to have a go at it against the clock. It's a 45-minute question, so see how you can get on and see what you're up against right away. Go for it straight away. The great thing about this question value is it's a relatively low technical question. The question that's waiting for you in September may be exactly the same. It's very common to have low technical questions, but it might have a bit more technicality, in which case you might need, even more knowledge before you can actually do the question in September. But you're already ready to do question value. You have a pen, you have a brain, off you go. So I want you to have a go at question value. I want you to try and do it. Now, just to say it again, the Ivory Tower articles are all in chapter 5. You don't need to go anywhere. From where can we download the Ivory Tower articles? You have them already. They're in chapter 5 of your class notes. Okay, they're in chapter 5 of your class notes, so you don't need to go anywhere to download them. If you want to go and look at Graham's original articles, which I think is extremely dangerous at this stage, but you can if you want to, then as I mentioned, the way to get into those is to go to the ACCA website. And then into their search, you put in CPD, which stands for Continuing Professional Development. Then you press CPD articles, obviously. And then you start reading them. That's what you do. You just off you go. You start reading them. But that's a big ask. And what I'm going to do on revision is of course, I've read them all, and I'm going to give you summaries of all of these articles. But these articles, even the summaries of them, are probably a little bit beyond you at the moment. But the thing is about question 4 is it's a real state of mind kind of a thing. And if I didn't show you question 4 and didn't get you used to the idea of chatting about stuff, then you'll never get into the groove in time for the examination. If I just did this on revision with you, then it wouldn't give you enough time to get into the groove. Students, you see, it's quite common for students to do P1 and P3 together with P2, either around about the same time or even at the same sitting. And they're quite happy just, sort of chatting away in P1 and, just sort of slapping down any old rubbish as fast as they can when they're doing P1. But when they get to P2, they want to be really techie and very clever. And actually, that's not the skill that you need in question 4. You do need that in question 1, 2, and 3. But question 4 is much more chatty, as I'm going to show you. So is everyone clear? Any questions before I have a go at this question myself? So I'm just going to show this again. So your responsibility as regards current issues is really simple. You've got to get into actually writing answers by doing question value, and you've got to get into the knowledge of the Ivory Tower by reading those articles. Is everyone cool on that? Tell me a cool before I go for my answer. Does everyone know what they're doing? Any questions? Cool. All right. So let me do it then. Question value. So let's have a look. This is just, the strange thing is this is actually a question from 2002, and it's supposed to be current issues, right? But actually, it's the same issues that are still current now as they were 20 years ago. It's amazing how, everything stays the same. Everything changes and everything stays the same. So this question this question that we're looking at here, we're going to look at a really, really similar one, which was examined in the last exam. There's a really, really similar one that was examined the year before. And, these questions, they just repeat themselves because it's the same stuff that's relevant for each sitting. Nothing really changes. So, what we're going to do is part C, as I say. And the reason we're doing it is at the least number of marks, and we've only got 20 minutes to go. And you want to see what I'm doing. But this discussion is on fair value. And of course, fair value is just as relevant now as it was in 2002. Of course it is. So the active word that is here is discuss. And what that means is whack down 6 ideas. The number of ideas that you're expected to deliver is equal to the number of marks. So it's 6 marks, so it's 6 ideas. And the examiner describes these ideas as being a point. You deliver 6 points for 6 marks. And the way that we're going to package these 6 points is by using the written word, the sentence. We're going to make 6 sentences with 6 points. But we're delivering 6 points to a very tired marker who's fed up of reading drivel that's wandering all over the place. So we're going to package this for the tired marker. We're going to go heading sentence, heading sentence, heading sentence, heading sentence, all the way down. So our tool that we're going to utilize, in fact, for question 2, 3, and 4, for question 4, 3, and 2, is heading sentence, sentence, heading sentence, sentence. Heading, sentence, sentence, heading, sentence, sentence. 65 heading sentences for 65 marks of narrative, of which these 6 I'm going to deliver to you now. Discuss whether the intended use of fair values will reduce the importance of historical cost information. Well, the main thing that we do when we're answering these questions is copy stuff from the scenario. So, you can see that the examiner, it's very obvious, I think, the examiner wants us to talk about fair value and he wants us to talk about historical cost. So, and then he wants us to talk about importance. So, there's 3 marks right there. So let's get those 3 marks. But really, it's not meaningful unless I have a clock on what I want is a duck. So it's 10 marks. Sorry, I do apologise. It's 6 marks. Multiplying by 1.8 minutes per mark. It's pretty time pressured. Once you try and do this against the duck, it's pretty time pressured. So I'm putting on my iPhone timer there. Quacks like a duck when we're done. Let's see how we get on against the duck. So question value part C. So fair value. Fair value is market value. FV is the price you would expect to receive. Yes. Is the price you'd expect to receive for selling your asset. 1 mark. Thank you very much. Historical cost. Historical cost is literal. HC is simply the amount paid for the asset when it was purchased. What should we do? What should we do next? Fresh new brand new page. Fresh new brand new page, because I don't want to straddle the page. Mutually exclusive. These two are mutually exclusive. You use either HC or FV for each asset. You cannot use both. What do we have there? Intended, there's a good word, intended. The International Accounting Standards Board, of course. It is true that the ISB intentions have been to increase the use of FV. So obviously this has decreased the use of HC. What else did we have there in the question? Importance. Yeah, importance. I think I'll twist the word importance. The reasoning behind preferential use of FV is related to usefulness. It is widely accepted FV is more relevant than HC. And then where should we go with it? How many have got? Sorry, how many points have I got? That's a good point. How many more points do I need? So I've got 5 already. How about reliability? But it is accepted that some fair value measurements require substantial judgment thereby decreasing reliability. Well, brilliant. Okay, there you go. So that's how it's done. What do you think, guys? How do I get on against the clock? Dead easy, 2 minutes to go. I didn't struggle at all, did I? And it's the only area where I don't struggle. P2 is pretty hard. And let me tell you, when I come to do the mixed questions, I'll really struggle against the clock. I really will. But here, you just whack down any old rubbish. So there is an answer. There's like a million other different things that you could say. So while the clock's still running, I'll just put down the other sorts of things that you could have discussed. Are you ready? I think what I'll do is I'll go fresh new brand new page for just a few more ideas. So I'll just put little arrows. So The use of fair value across the whole balance sheet is actually called fair value accounting. And we could have discussed that. The use of historical cost across the whole balance sheet is actually called historical cost accounting, and you might have heard of both of those. And we don't do either. What we do is we do mixed accounting. There's 3 marks there. So there's fair value accounting, FVA as it's called, and historical cost accounting. And, depending on how you look at it, we either do a bit of both, or because we don't do pure form, we don't do either. We do a mixture. Then you could talk about what kind of things are usually at fair value. Things at fair value tend to be things like financial instruments, to be honest with you. Financial instruments being fancy, which means things like, speculative shares. We could talk about what things are at fair value. There you go, there's the duck. See how easy it was against the duck? When you can do it, of course, when you can do it. But I do know I have a little bit more knowledge than you. But do you know what I think is my real advantage compared to you guys, if I'm honest? I think it's my storytelling. I do, honestly. I think really I'm good at storytelling because I've practiced lots of questions. And that's why I really, really recommend you have a go at value and try and do it yourself. Because once you get into the groove with these things, you don't need much knowledge and you can make it go all over the place. You could talk about anything you like, anything that pops in your head. The sort of things that are usually at historical cost are things like stock. Then you can talk about the policy choices. So you've got goodwill policies. You've got full and partial. And you can maybe expand that a little bit, because full is essentially fair value and partial is basically sort of an equivalent to cost almost. And then if you know anything about it, you can talk about PPE revaluation policies. Maybe you know a little bit about that from your F7 studies. Maybe you don't, but maybe you do. And then you can talk about the fact that, shareholders receive the balance sheet 6 months after the year end, and therefore even by the time you get it, it's already 6 months old. So balance sheet received 6 months after year end, and that leads to the importance of volatility. Maybe the information would be irrelevant, and then you can have like hyperinflationary environments. You can talk about that. You can talk about anything you want. Honestly, if you want to bring in Donald Trump, you bring in Donald Trump. I'm not quite sure how you'd bring in Donald Trump, but if you can manage it and you can get Donald Trump is somehow relevant to fair value, you can say that fair values have gone down right across the globe because the planet is less likely to survive because of Donald Trump's attitudes towards coal burning, and you think you can somehow get that into that answer. I'm not sure quite how that's working for me, but if you can bring Donald Trump in, you can get a mark as long as you connect Donald Trump to the requirements. Honestly, you can bring Donald Duck in there if you can actually connect it. Donald Duck, get a fair value for Donald Duck. Donald Duck is an intangible. I know we're not going to get into that. Donald Duck is an intangible that's held by Disney, and therefore, blah, 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 blah. You can go where you like with this. Honestly, anything you like. So that's 6 plus 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. It's at least 19 points that we've managed to come up with relatively quickly. But of course I'm cheating. I do have knowledge. It is true. I do have knowledge. But honestly, I think the main thing about it is I'm just used to talking around these things, and I know that you don't need to be too clever. I'm sure you knew that stock was at stock was at historical cost, and And you may not be quite so good at financial instruments yet, but by the time you get to the exam, you'll think, oh yeah, financial instruments are fair value, but would you be able to use it instantly in a question 4? That's the thing, you see, the ability to talk around stuff. And the reason I've chosen this question is because it is of a low technical. How do you judge? You like that word, don't you? Punit, we just answered that. You might have missed it then. Sounds like Punit, you missed that. I answered that earlier. So go back and have a look at it. So, yes, the reason that I chose this question was precisely because sorry, I just got really distracted by that very strange question. The reason that I chose this question for you is because, you know, it's a real broad thing. You know, looking at the requirements here, you're discussing the importance of published financial statements. You can say what's in financial statements. You can talk about the P&L, the balance sheet, and the cash flow statement. You can talk about sources of information, what information they might want. You can talk about what kind of investors we have and what information they might need, what's changing in financial reporting, what performance measures are being used, you know, what sorts of things that they use, like ratio analysis when they're doing stuff. I mean, I've totally destroyed that question there. It looks a little bit ridiculous. But the idea is that, you know, you can look at these questions and you can start to generate ideas. The idea is that you start to look at these questions and go, you know, I can talk about this, I can talk about that, and talk about the other. I'm a little bit nervous about going too much further with anything else. Are there any questions? That actually was slightly quicker than I was expecting. I was expecting a couple of more questions, so I ended up being a bit quicker than I expected. Are there any more questions? Is knowledge of the conceptual framework helpful in answering question 4? That's what the examiner always says, isn't it? Not really, to be honest with you. He over-exaggerates it. I don't know why he says it. It's very strange. It certainly used to be true. 10 or 15 years ago, it was the same examiner, and he used to like directly examine the conceptual framework. If there's a question directly on the conceptual framework, then obviously you need to know the conceptual framework, and I will be teaching you the conceptual framework. But is it always the case that you're using the conceptual framework? Well, you can if you want to, but you don't have to. But if you look at the sort of stuff that I've brought in my answer, you can see that there are words that are coming from the conceptual framework. They are words like reliability and relevance, and those obviously come from the conceptual framework. But, you know, relevance is always relevance and reliability is always reliability. You don't have to bring those words from the conceptual framework. But it's certainly helpful, yes. But I wouldn't go reading the framework and thinking by reading the framework you're going to be able to answer the questions. Practicing the questions is the way to get good at the questions rather than reading the framework. So is it helpful to have a knowledge of the conceptual framework? Absolutely, of course, yes. But the information that you need as regards the conceptual framework, I'll be teaching you during the course. I wouldn't go off and read the conceptual framework. You know, knowledge is definitely useful, but practice is also useful as well. How important is using standards and IFRS? It's absolutely critical, but totally useless, Ridwan. It's very common for students to associate using standards with using standard numbers. It's very common for students to associate using IFRS for using IFRS numbers. For example, one of your top tips is IFRS 16, but IFRS 16 is worth no marks at all. It's lease accounting. If you can discuss lease accounting, then absolutely, then definitely there are marks. But knowing that lease accounting is IFRS 16 is worth no marks at all. And knowing how financial reporting works, knowing your standards, plays a part in question 1, 2, 3 and 4, probably least in question 4, where you can always talk around the subject. You can use stakeholder analysis, you can talk about Donald Trump, you can talk about fair value, you can talk about usefulness of information, you can talk about different populations requiring different information, different needs, you could talk about the English language, and you can talk about the politics of the English language. In the Middle East, you can talk about Arabic. You can bring in anything you like in question 4, but into question 2 and 3 and in question 1, in question 2 and 3 in particular, now if the question's asking you about revenue recognition in question 2, then you need to know your knowledge for revenue recognition, but you don't need to know the number IFRS 15. All right. So what I'd like to do with the last couple of minutes before I round up is round up and set you up for the next 2 weeks with your homework. If there are no more questions, what I'll do is I'll go to the slides. So that's your homework, guys. Going back to the beginning, this is your homework. Your homework is do Hebrides over and over again till it becomes easy. Then do Ronette over and over again till it becomes easy. Then do Extreme over and over again till it becomes easy. Then do Squire over and over again till it becomes easy. Then Value over and over again till it becomes easy. And then read the Ivory Tower articles from chapter 5. That is your list of homework over the next couple of weeks. You're going to be pretty busy doing that. If you've got any questions over the next couple of weeks, then of course feel free to email me. I'll just go right back up to the top and reinforce my email. Have a fabulous couple of weeks, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks when we start the more formal financial reporting, starting with things like performance reporting and revenue recognition and the IFRS and the standards and all that sort of stuff. There's my email. Have a fabulous couple of weeks. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time. Any questions, bang it off to an email. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.